And when that neighbor realized that he got arrested and charged, he was in the wind. He
Yeah.
wanted nothing to do with it. Didn't want to help. Leave me out of it. Keep my name out your dirty mouth.
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're answering a really interesting question about using force, deadly force against looters. All right, well, we've had some high profile examples of some devastation in the state of California, but this really could apply to any disaster prone areas. Think locations where hurricanes hit, think about large scale power outages. We've had a couple of these things happen in the past few years, and what can you do ultimately? But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And this came up for, man, California, those poor bastards.
I know. And in fact, I saw an article about a California man who went back to his partially destroyed home and was just patrolling it with his gun. And I was like, well, good for you, California.
Yeah.
That you not expected,
Not expected.
but but it's a concern. I mean,
No, I've lived it. You've lived it.
yeah, no, I mean, we had Hurricane Ike, oof, down here in 2008, and that was to get back into our neighborhood. You had to show your driver's license, and the police had it completely cut off
Yep.
because the looting was so bad.
Yeah, I lived on Galveston Island, and you couldn't get on the island unless you were a resident. But that didn't stop the locals from engaging in some tomfoolery. But I can't tell you how many signs I saw that said, you loot, we shoot. I'm sure you saw some of those.
Oh yeah, big time.
Well, in California, I don't know that they have anything left to make signs out of.
No,
Maybe
probably
some
not.
surfboards.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, really, hearts go out to the folks in California. It's absolutely terrible. And if y'all can help California, please do. Maybe they're terrible on guns, but they're still human beings. So if you can lend them some help, please do. But I think it raises an important question about, hey, what are my rights should I find myself in one of these situations? Not just mass fire, not just hurricane. Maybe it's a power outage, heavy rain, heavy snow. Are you just kind of defenseless in this stuff? And I think we have some answers.
We do have some answers. So, I think let's talk about what castle doctrine is and isn't first, because I think that's a helpful place to start. Because we've got legal protections for lots of different things. You've got castle doctrine legal protections, which gives you some allowance for force and deadly force in certain situations. And then if you don't have castle doctrine, you're going to have to rely on your defensive property laws, which are extraordinarily weak. You don't want to rely on those. So first, castle doctrine.
Yeah, so what we're looking at typically is a forceful unlawful entry or attempted entry into, in each state, it's going to be different, occupied habitation, occupied structure, but really what it is focusing on is, are there, and then there are states that say, hey, this place is just designed for overnight accommodations, maybe it doesn't actually have to be occupied, but that's typically what we're looking at.
Right. And I would say for the most part, it has to be occupied. And that's the zinger, right? For your castle doctrine protection is if you're not in it, it's not your castle. And if it's fully destroyed and you're the Californian standing outside patrolling the grounds, well, is that a castle doctrine protection? Probably not. And consider, I mean, this is with fires, consider if the structure has been destroyed to the point that the entry is no longer forceful, because that's generally a castle doctrine requirement too, right? It generally, although some states will vary, your castle is occupied, and generally someone has made a forceful and unlawful entry or attempted entry into that castle. Well, force, if you're just stepping through some rubble, I could see a jury finding there was no force present and thus no castle doctrine protection.
Yeah, and so when we talk about force, we're just talking about any amount of force exerted to gain entry. So open door, you walk through an open door, that's not going to be considered a forceful entry. Opening a window, opening a door, maybe the door's all the way closed but unlatched and you push the door.
Yeah, we have case law in Texas that says that's force.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a pretty low bar, and absent, having some kind of barrier that you have to break, you're going to lose that element.
Right. And so, castle doctrine, great. It means different things in different states. In some states, it's just sort of your general authorization, and a jury still has to find that you're reasonable. Here in Texas and in many of our good 2A states, it means if a jury finds that that castle doctrine violation did in fact occur, that's it. Inquiry over. At that point, you could have shot him 47 times. But the fact
Not
that,
recommended.
not recommended, but the fact that the castle doctrine violation occurred is what the jury will be checking yes or no on. And if yes, presumption of reasonableness. Those are the best states. If you're not in one of those states, get up and move.
Yeah, and so going back a little bit to this, all right, you got to be in the structure, all right? Why do we do that? Well, theoretically, the law wants to preserve lives over things. If somebody breaks into an empty building, well, guess what? The only thing that's in danger at that point, theoretically, under the law, is stuff. And, when you're present in it, well, all right, now you are in danger. This is a person crime. This is not just a property crime. And so that's where that distinction comes from. And I'm not saying this is the way I want the world to be, because obviously somebody breaks into my house. If I walk in and find them, guess what? I want to have full defense rights, obviously. But that's just what we see across the states. All right, so we talked about defending our castle, and we're going to talk about defending another person's castle, your neighbor's property. But let's just talk about our property, not our structure or anything like that at that point. And we're talking about, would force or deadly force be justified? I mean, until it turns into something else like a theft. We're talking about trespassers.
So you cannot use deadly force against trespasser. You can use force generally. And if they are a thief, they are stealing or otherwise damaging your property, you're going to have to just revert to the property defense laws, which we've already, spoken about earlier in the video. They're not strong. You're not going to get legal presumptions. In some states, you're going to have most states, you're going to have no deadly force authorization at all. And so it's a tough row to hoe if you have this scenario in which someone is just stealing from you. Now, you confront them, they threaten your life, you've got a life crime, that's something, but oh boy. And then, and that's not even to say if it's not your property you're protecting. So let's imagine now there is not a castle doctor protection. Perhaps the castle is no longer intact enough to serve. Perhaps you are not in it. You walk in and find this issue. Perhaps it's your neighbor's property, right? We must then rely, if you have a looting situation, you want to use force or deadly force, you have to rely on your simple protection of property, which varies quite a bit state by state. Actually, Texas is the strongest state I know of.
And it's not great.
And it's still not great. So, Richard, you look out and your neighbor's house is getting looted and they're not there. What can you do?
Ooh, my hands are going to be very tight here. But we look at, all right, the only thing in danger at this point is their stuff. The law would say, hey, a use of force to protect it, that would probably be an easy go. So when we say force, think punch, grab, tackle, restrain, pepper spray, potentially even brandishing a firearm as a warning if your state has, a brandishing law. But a use of deadly force in defense of property alone, typically not justified unless you jump through some really big hoops. And it being your neighbor, there's one more hoop that they have to jump through, which is you need to have permission from your neighbor.
Permission. I mean, and Texas does have some other exceptions. I don't think they're even worth getting into here because most states provide zero authorization for you to use deadly force to protect your property alone or someone else's property. So, I mean, we don't even need to get into the Texas exceptions. I guess comment below if you want more Texas specific videos. But I mean, most states just say, oh, you're watching your neighbor's house getting looted? Okay, call police.
Right.
Be a good witness. You can't do anything. Now, I will say there will be some states, Texas is one of them, but other states that have the exception of permission, right? Your neighbor has either contracted you to protect their property or explicitly asked you and given you that permission to serve as the protector, to protect it as though it's your property, in which case you still got to abide by the law, right? If deadly force isn't authorized, it's not authorized. But
what I would say about this permission of neighbors, and maybe this is a good idea, especially let's say you have a vacation home, you're out of town. I think a big mistake a lot of people fall into is they just get this kind of this agreement orally. Hey, I'm out of town. Will you look after the house, protect it, But I think it's really important to get these things in writing.
Oh, I have an example of that.
Oh, let's do that.
Yes, this is from years ago. Transport yourself back to 2014 or so, and I had a client who was actually asked by his neighbor. His neighbor was moving outside of the continental U.S. and was only coming back to the house on very, very scant occasion, and said, look, until the point that I can get this thing sold, will you keep an eye out? Because it's going to be vacant. And, that worries me. And so my client said, absolutely. And he said, okay, great. Protect it as though it's your own. My client goes, super, I can do that. And he did, in fact, have to do that. Now, it didn't help him that he misjudged the situation. He saw some guys, they had a basically empty trailer. He thought they were casing the house. He went out, drew his gun. Turns out it was the lawn guys. Ruh-roh. So, no, you should know what's going on before you do that. But, we thought, well, you know what? Okay, jury can determine whether or not he was reasonable. And, because a lawn guys with basically empty trailer, that, you don't see that very often.
No, that's suspicious.
Yeah. And, you could think about, the way they were walking and how many. There are lots of factors there to decide reasonableness. But first hoop was, why are you doing this to your neighbor's property? You have to have an exception. And great, he gave you permission. And when that neighbor realized that he got arrested and charged, he was in the wind. He wanted nothing to do with it. Didn't want to help. Leave me out of it. Keep my name out your dirty mouth. And so, but you would be surprised how many people who you think are your friends, once the stuff hits the fan, are like, oh man, I don't want any part of this. Leave me out.
Yeah, so let's say you find yourself in that situation and your state provides for it. Let's get these things in. And it doesn't have to be anything overly formal. It can be an email. Hey man, I'm out of town. Will you look after my house? In most states, that's gonna check the box. Yeah. But all right, they're committing a theft on a empty house, burglarizing a house. They are stealing stuff. Generally, use of deadly force in defense of property alone, not justified. But these situations, I'll say, if you would be justified in using force, let's say you go out and confront the person and the situation escalates and all right, now you're in danger. Well, that's a completely different story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because, at that point, we're not talking about property crime. We're talking, hey, look, you're in danger. And then your typical self-defense laws are going to kick in. Are you in danger of unlawful deadly force at that point? Would deadly force be justified? And the jury's going to ask all those questions. I will say, though, kind of one factor that kind of hurts a little bit, juries typically don't like it when our defenders are kind of starting this chain of events. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I agree with you. What started the chain of events is these people looting, right? But going out and confronting or, kind of escalating this confrontation, I will say juries tend to kind of hesitate on those things.
Yeah, I would just say use your best judgment in terms of having clean hands in the interaction.
And so the whole tragedy of, pretty much everything that we covered up to this point, and I can hear it in the comments because I have the same frustration. So you're saying I'm just completely screwed. I got to sit here, watch my city burn down, let my stuff get stolen.
Not necessarily, but you should be extremely cautious. You may remember this. It was Hurricane
Harvey?
Was it Harvey? We actually had police investigating the good guys trying to protect against looters. Remember we had someone in Galveston County shot at a looter.
Oh, yeah. And then think about, not necessarily the same as like a big natural disaster, but Summer of Love, lots of looting going on.
Mm-hmm. We saw how the good guys were treated in those scenarios.
We saw people posted up in their houses with firearms just in case their house got, whatever. We see them getting arrested. We see the McCluskeys. We see all types of people. We see Kyle Rittenhouse. We see all these people getting dragged into these really unreasonable situations and they're getting arrested.
So yes, the answer is not you are totally helpless and you can't do nothing, but it is use caution, knowing that you are not going to be treated favorably. And that is just, I wish that weren't the truth, but it is the world in which we live.
We actually drafted that right in the Summer of Love 2021 session about the use of force in response to arson and looting and all these other things.
And we drafted our McCluskey bill.
Yeah, we drafted our McCluskey bill. And, we see a hole in the law in all of these states for, all right, these declared emergencies. We have worked really hard here, for example, in the state of Texas, to remove the government's ability to disarm people, to stop the sale and transfer of firearms and ammunition during a declared disaster. And so I think we just need to keep pushing on that front. Obviously, these are going to be some really trying times, and maybe law enforcement, they're not showing up. We've seen a few examples of that happening. having the ability to defend yourself, defend your property under these really, really, really trying times, I think that's really important.
It is.
But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please question and comment for us below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.